This is DW News, live from Berlin. Syria's President Assad reportedly flees the capital as rebel forces storm into Damascus. The rebels declare the city free from Assad's 24-year rule, announcing the start of a new era for the Syrian people. Syria's prime minister says he's ready to assist with a peaceful transfer of government. I'm Mariana Evanstein. It's good to have you with us. We begin with breaking news from Syria, where the regime of President Bashar al-Assad has collapsed. Assad reportedly fled the capital Damascus to an unknown destination after rebel forces entered the city, meeting little resistance. It's been less than 2 weeks since the rebels launched their offensive against the regime. Let's have a look at how the last few hours unfolded in Syria.
On Saturday night, regional leaders and Bashar al-Assad's ally Russia held an emergency meeting about Syria in Doha. But it appears the country's fate was already sealed.
My dear brothers, we are living the final moments of liberating Homs by God's will. This is a historic moment that will distinguish between right and wrong.
Shortly after the rebel alliance released this statement, rebels declared the central city of Homs fully liberated, to the joy of Bashar al-Assad's opponents. Damascus was next, and the rebel alliance faced hardly any resistance, abandoned Syrian army checkpoints, foreboding the big announcement.
By the grace of God, the city of Damascus was liberated. The tyrant Bashar al-Assad was overthrown, and all oppressed detainees were released from the regime's prisons. The Damascus Conquest Operations Room calls on the Mujahideen brothers and the citizens to preserve all the property of the free Syrian state. Long live a free and proud Syria for all Syrians of all religions.
As rebels and their supporters celebrated their triumph in Damascus, Syria's prime minister said he was still in the capital and willing to work with anyone to ensure a smooth transition of power.
I am here in my house. I have not left it, and I do not intend to leave it, except in a peaceful manner, so that I can ensure the continuity of the work of public institutions and state institutions and facilities, and ensure there will be security and reassurances to our fellow citizens. I hope that everyone will think rationally and think about their homeland and country.
For now, on the streets of Damascus and other Syrian towns and cities, rational thinking appears to be taking a backseat to raw emotion, as Assad's opponents celebrate the end of his 24-year-long authoritarian rule.
Let's get some analysis now from Fawaz Gerges. He is a professor of Middle Eastern Political and International Relations at the London School of Economics. Welcome to DW. So we just saw in that report many Syrians celebrating the fall of the Assad regime. But what's next? What kind of governance can we expect from the rebels who are led by the HTS group, a radical Islamist group?
Right. For the majority of the Syrian people, it's a moment of joy. They are rejoicing in the new freedom that they have. Keep in mind that Assad was one of the most brutal regimes in the Middle East. He ruled Syria from 2000 up to 2024. Syria could go 2 ways. It could descend, I hope not, into violence and social and political and economic upheaval, or it could basically begin the process of healing. It could really establish a functioning government and begin the process of state building and nation building. This moment, as a historian, it reminds me of Iran in 1979. It was a really socially based, broadly based, forward-looking, inclusive revolution. Yet the Iranian revolution in 1979 was hijacked by the clerics a year after the revolution. I hope Syria basically travels a different route, and I have trust and confidence in the Syrian people that they really want to put an end to a very brutal and very autocratic and very deadly regime.
Well, we have heard the rebels make a statement saying that they're not looking for revenge. They've promised to respect minorities. But of course, many Syrian Christians and Alawis supported the Assad regime. So can they and other minority groups rely on these assurances from the rebels?
The talks by the rebels or the opposition are very important. Let's not underestimate what the rebels are saying. They are trying to reassure the Syrian population. They're making sure there is no large-scale violence against other government properties or minorities. They have made it very clear. They want a peaceful, gradual process of transition from Assad rule to the new Syria. In particular, I am very impressed by the rhetoric of the vanguard of the opposition, that is the Islamist Salafi movement, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Its leader, Abu Muhammad al-Gulani, has made it very clear. He does not really want to exact revenge or vengeance against his enemies, in particular the Alawites, the major social base of the regime, or other minorities. So that's very reassuring. But of course, we have to wait and see what happens in the next few weeks and next few months. My take on it is that the opposition has matured a great deal. We are seeing really a kind of a different kind of opposition. But this is the beginning. I mean, we have to wait and see whether the coalition can, whether the opposition can put its house in order and begin the process of social healing and establish an inclusive, diverse government to reflect the reality of Syria, because it's one of the most diverse countries in the Middle East.
And we have been hearing reports or more rumors circulating that Assad has fled Damascus to an undisclosed location. There have been denials of this, but in any case, if he is to flee, where could he find refuge?
Credible reports that a plane took off from the Damascus airport early last night. And the reports say that basically Assad was on it. My take on it, there are two ways, two places that Assad will seek refuge. It's the United Arab Emirates or Russia. These are the two only places that could basically host Bashar al-Assad. But regardless, this is a different moment. Let's really celebrate with the Syrian people this moment of hope. One scene really, for me, was extremely moving. It was the prison of Sadnaya in Damascus, on the outskirts of Damascus, one of the most brutal prisons in the history of the Assad regime. In particular, women prisoners. They were distressed, they were confused, they were frightened. They did not really want to leave their cells. They could not believe that they were going to be free. So the prison, the Sadnaya prison, for me, was really a symbol of Bashar al-Assad brutal rule, and it tells me about the moment of hope, the moment of freedom, the moment of dignity for the millions of the Syrian people who really look forward to the future. I hope the opposition or the oppositions are up to this particular challenge, because it's going to take years for Syria to really heal, and in particular the scars that have been really left after many years of wars and fighting and torture. Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. So you can imagine the challenges facing Syria in the next few months and next few years.
That was Fawaz Gerges, professor of Middle Eastern and Political and International Relations at the London School of Economics. We appreciate all of your insights. Thank you.
Syria's Prime Minister Mohammed al-Jalali says he is ready to cooperate in a peaceful transfer of power with any new leadership chosen by the people. He's also called for free elections. Let's listen to a statement he released.
This country can be a normal one, a country that builds good relations with its neighbours and with the world, without entering into any regional alliances or blocs. But we leave this matter to any new leadership that will be chosen by the Syrian people. And we're ready to cooperate with the new leadership and facilitate what they need so that various government files can be transferred smoothly and systematically in a way that preserves the state's facilities.
For some analysis on this topic, I'm joined in the studio by our reporter Gasia Ohanes, who was born in Aleppo and follows this story for us very, very closely. Gasia, this has been a very long and bloody civil war. Did you expect it to be over so quickly?
Well, Gerard, it is a decades-long dictatorship, over 13 years of war, and for all of it to end within less than 2 weeks is unbelievable to most of Syrian people. I did not see this coming before the offensive, but in recent days, as rebels advanced in lightning speed, it became clear that Assad's time was up.
It was very fast, the
advance. And part of that is because Assad's closest allies were turning on him in the last moments to redeem themselves, to save themselves. And a lot of the rebels were coordinating directly with Syrian army generals, saying, this is your last chance. Here's a number you can call. Tell us where you are. Cooperate with us. Let us into the city. And that's why we had the best case scenario in Damascus with little bloodshed, little fighting. They were able to capture the capital.
Now, tumultuous days, of course. What can we expect, let's say, in the short term, the next few days?
In the next few days, there will be more of a understanding of what we're looking at politically, but I want to also look at what is coming out now. I've seen hundreds of names of prisoners, political prisoners that are circulating. People are trying to find their family members. They've been imprisoned, some of them since the start of the war, some of them for even longer, for decades. So their brutal histories of torture, all of these stories are going to come out. We should expect to see trials of people that the rebels will now capture to hold them accountable. And once they reconcile with all this pain, once they hold people accountable, then there will be talk of how Syria can move on and find a new political future.
Now, there were different opposition groups involved in the war against the regime in Syria. Can you give us a brief overview, a rough overview, who they are and what they want?
Yes, there's many actors involved in Syria. I'll keep it brief and focus on the main three groups that are involved in this, because they will be the ones doing most of the negotiation. So first we had Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. That was the Islamist, extremist rebel group that is classified by the US as a terrorist organization, but they were leading this offensive and in recent days had changed their stance. They've changed the way they look, the way they present themselves. They've assured minorities that they're going to be safe under their rule. So that's the first group. And the second group is the Syrian Free Army. They're backed by Turkey. They're also, all of these groups are combined in their opposition to Assad. But now we will see how they get along once Assad's out of the picture. And at last, I want to talk about the Kurds, because Kurds make up 10% of the Syrian population, more or less. But the Kurdish faction, the Syrian Democratic Forces, they're backed by the US, and they controlled around 25% of Syria, including the oil fields. So there will have to be some kind of settlement between these different groups.
Could that become a flashpoint? I mean, the oil field, the fact that it's 25% of Syria, but they're only 10% of the population?
Yes, they will have to make concessions, I imagine, in the future. And not only that, but the rebels being backed by Turkey, who has, its own agenda with the Kurds. They accuse the Kurdish faction of housing what they say are PKK terrorists. So there's a lot of clashes there. But so far, these groups have signaled their readiness to hold talks. And while Assad was losing his grip on the country, actually all these groups started capturing more and more territory to have something more to bargain with once the negotiations start.
We're going to talk about the Turkish side a bit later in the program with Dorian Jones in Istanbul. Now, this very diverse group, these groups, do you have any hope that they can govern together?
There is a lot of hope at the moment, but we also have to take into account that we've seen extremist groups like ISIS make a comeback in this time. So it's not just about these groups, but what happens with all the armed extreme fighters that are going around? Who's going to bring them under control? Are they going to join the army? What's going to happen on the ground? I do have hope, but I am watching cautiously as well.
I can imagine. Assad was supported by some minorities in Syria, like the Christians, the Alawite Muslims, and the Druze. What can they expect now? Repercussions?
Now, the rebels themselves have said that they're not out for revenge. They've said that they want to show mercy, however you want to interpret that. But they do have lists of generals, of high-ranking people who have been responsible for some of the atrocities that we've seen in Syria. So they want those people, they've said. But when it comes to the general minority populations, they've told them that they will be safe. Now, not everybody's believed these reassurances, and we've seen a lot of Alawite minority people who are known as like Assad's loyalist base. They're on the Syrian coast. They've fled the country, and a lot of the Kurdish population has also been displaced from Aleppo because, again, they don't know if what's been promised is actually going to be delivered.
Very briefly, do you have hope that this can lead to a transfer of Syria into a democratic nation?
Jared, I'm very happy to see the end of a dictatorship. I grew up in Syria. I was indoctrinated in that education system. We saw their statues and their pictures everywhere. And now, for the first time, everyone is trying to imagine a Syria that looks different. So I would like to see how that looks, but it's hard to imagine something you've actually never seen represented. I have hope it can work, but it can also open up more problems, but like we said, with all these different factions and Islamist groups, if there will be a secular society or a religious rule and what that means for women, for minorities, and we'll just have to see how that works.
We will. Thank you very much, Gasia Ohanes there. Now, Turkey has taken more Syrian refugees than any other country, and Syrians living in Turkey have been celebrating after rebel forces took control of Damascus and Bashar al-Assad fled the city. In Istanbul, Syrians have been dancing, chanting and waving flags used by Syria's opposition to mark the rebels' victory. Many Syrians in Turkey have said they could not return to their towns and villages while Assad remained in power. The United Nations says 3.6 million Syrians have been living in Turkey since the Syrian war broke out in 2011. And joining me now from Istanbul is our correspondent Dorian Jones. Dorian, Turkey backed some of the rebel forces in Syria. So is the end of the Assad regime something the Turkish government is now supporting?
Oh, absolutely. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was congratulating the rebels and was predicting that they would seize Damascus and overthrow Assad, the Syrian president. But it has to be said that only a month or so before, President Erdogan was calling for talks with Assad as a means to reconciling the two countries and particularly the return of the millions of Syrian refugees living in Turkey. But Erdogan, speaking to media, said Assad has paid the price of rejecting those overtures. And those rejection of those overtures, in many ways, is seen by some analysts as the trigger for this operation against Assad, although Ankara has been emphasizing it had no role in the actual overthrow of Assad. But Turkey is backing one of the militias, the Syrian National Army, who did partake in those operations. And while Turkey says it doesn't have any direct links to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is a designated terrorist organization, most people believe that Turkey has still pretty close links. It provides aid and supplies to the regions that are under their control. So most people think that this operation would not have been carried out, at least with Ankara's approval.
Now, with this new phase of a transition of instability in Syria, will Turkey try and extend its influence in the country?
Well, I think certainly, given the fact that Turkey was one of the strongest and most steadfast supporters of the opposition through thick and thin, when many other of their backers disappeared, Turkey did stand firm with them, providing supplies and aid to them, allowing convoys to continue, and also giving training and arming to some of those groups as well. So Turkey will be looking for a return on those investments, given the fact that for so many years Turkey has been backing the rebels and has paid a very heavy price with hosting millions of refugees here in Turkey. So undoubtedly Turkey will see the extension of its influence into Syria. Bashar al-Assad for many years was a rival of Erdogan's. He was mainly seen as, in many ways, a threat, especially given his close ties to Iran, which is a regional rival of Turkey. Now Turkey in many ways will be looking into cash in on its support and looking to an extension of its influence into this region. And that will also play well with its overtures to Washington, especially with the incoming president of Donald Trump. This will be a very powerful message underlining how important Turkey is to the United States in the region, as well as also to the Europeans as well, given the fact that it is in many ways a gatekeeper for refugees, and will underline the importance again of how important Ankara is in this very volatile region, and also for efforts going forward in terms of developing democracy and stability in the region.
Dorian, very briefly, one big issue for Turkey is, of course, the millions of refugees from Syria. You've mentioned them. Is that one of Erdogan's main interests now, to let the people go back to Syria? Briefly, if you can.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This has turned out to be a major political liability for President Erdogan. There's a growing dissatisfaction, unhappiness over the ongoing presence of millions of refugees. In fact, there is believed to be nearly 2 million refugees here in Istanbul. The prospect that those people could be returning back will be a major boost for President Erdogan. The key question is, will they be ready to return, given the uncertainty of the future of Syria at the present moment?
DW correspondent Dorian Jones there reporting from Istanbul. Thank you very much, Dorian.